Tonight, Nova Scotia's biggest wildfire on record takes a devastating toll.
What I built up there, I'll never get it back. You know, I'm sorry.
The stories of community support in a time of great need. The mental health risks after a stroke, why women are especially vulnerable.
I had a couple of very, very public breakdowns.
This call is from the tax department.
Despite efforts to prevent them, why those spam calls just keep coming.
It's a global problem. We won't be able to stop.
This is The National with Chief Correspondent Adrian Arsenault.
Nova Scotia's largest wildfire on record is still far from contained, and it's being fed by a blast of withering heat. The danger is growing. There are 4 fires that are out of control in the province, including this historic 18,000-hectare monster in the south, and another that's just sprung up east of Shelburne. Around 4,000 people live there, and more have fled to find safety from fires that threaten their homes. Communities at the mercy now of the weather and the efforts of firefighters. Kayla Hounsell is in Shelburne tonight, where residents are weighing risk and facing loss as the province's firefighters race to keep up.
All day, it was a race to the next fire, including at an historic members-only recreational facility in Halifax.
We're having a very, very busy afternoon due to fire activity. You can hear some sirens going now.
All of it tying up resources.
Believe it or not, in the last 12 hours, we have had somebody burning leaves with a propane torch. We've had somebody else who was starting a bonfire. This is a clear violation of the no stupid policy.
Not helped by the record temperatures and extremely dry conditions. The biggest fire is in Shelburne County, the largest wildfire in the province's history.
I think my house is on fire right now.
Actually, she thinks both of the homes she owns in this area are on fire. So convinced, she's already made a plan.
I just ordered a baby barn so I can turn it into a tiny house. Because there's a wait list for it.
This man was forced out of his home on Sunday, went to stay with friends, and had to leave again last night.
It's like you're running from, this thing that won't quit.
Across the province, nearly 20,000 people are out of their homes, and the fires are also affecting businesses and industries. Peter Sutherland is a blueberry farmer. He took this photo from his field before he had to leave. He's lost a lot of equipment.
You got insurance, but what I built up there, I'll never get it back. I'm sorry.
Some fishermen have lost gear.
It can be a financial disaster, and not only for the captains and crews, but other people around who rely on the lobster fishery.
That is absolutely fantastic. There's a box. You guys, amazing.
But through it all, people are showing up to help.
The amount of donations that have been turned in, money and product, is amazing. If we ask for something, we get it.
An extraordinary effort during an extreme time of need. And fire officials are warning they need that same community spirit and sense of responsibility to put the fires out.
So Kayla, you mentioned those record temperatures. Might be help coming on that front?
Yeah, Adrian, today was pretty much as bad as it could get. Just so hot and so dry. But yes, there is rain in the forecast for tomorrow night into Saturday. It is expected to be significant rain, and next week is also expected to be cool and wet. And I can tell you that is certainly something everyone here in Shelburne is thinking about. Everywhere I went today, people told me they're just hoping for rain.
All right, Kayla Hounsell in Shelburne tonight. Thank you. And a wildfire has prompted the partial evacuation of the community of Chapay in northern Quebec. The evacuation order covers 500 homes, about half of the community. Other fires are believed to be linked to power outages in Montreal that are affecting about 250,000 residents as the smoke and heat trigger protective mechanisms on the grid. Hydro-Quebec says power is coming back online gradually. A different kind of system disruption caused the chaos in travel plans for hundreds of Air Canada passengers. We're talking about a glitch in the same system that briefly grounded flights last week. Ithil Musa introduces us to customers getting tired of getting delayed.
For many Air Canada travelers, it was a day of delays.
I don't know what's going on here. I don't know why they can't organize.
Right now we're just waiting in limbo.
They had people all over the place. They were trying to tell them about zones, and it was a disaster.
The company says it experienced a technical issue with its communicator system on Thursday, a system used to communicate with aircraft and track flights. The issue caused more than 250 flights to be delayed, almost half of Air Canada's daily load.
This isn't something that happens very regularly.
But it did. This is the second time in a week Air Canada has been hit by a problem with its communicator system, causing countless delays and cancellations. The airline says the two incidents are unrelated, but this former Air Canada executive believes there could be one benefit to their timing.
Hopefully they'll have enough time between now and the start of the summer peak to iron out some of the issues that they're experiencing.
Air Canada says it's working to resolve the situation, and the federal government says it's keeping a close eye.
Air Canada has obligations to passengers who are impacted because this is caused by things that the airline has control over.
The federal government proposed new rules in April that would make it harder for airlines to get out of compensating passengers for costly delays and cancellations. But Minister Alghabra says even under the current rules, Air Canada passengers should be protected. Ithil Musa, CBC News, Toronto.
And a Toronto mayoral debate scheduled for tonight was cancelled. Several candidates pulled out after an alleged threat. So police identified a suspect as 29-year-old Junior Francois Lavagesse. He is wanted for threatening bodily harm and carrying a concealed weapon and is considered dangerous. Some of the candidates say they will avoid public appearances until he is caught. And the RCMP is cracking down on Chinese police stations operating in Canada. It says it has shut down illegal police activity in Ontario, Quebec, and BC. Activists say those stations are used to monitor and harass Chinese nationals, but China denies this. The RCMP says the investigation is ongoing, but did not say if it had arrested anyone. And the chemical industry is facing accusations it hid potential health dangers from the public. A new paper reviewed the tactics used by two of the biggest makers of the so-called forever chemicals. It found that decades ago, 3M and DuPont knew about the harms and kept them secret. Christine Birak now on what that says about monitoring the industry.
DuPont has always been proud of its research.
Working to uncover knowledge that will contribute to better living tomorrow.
Research the chemical industry often kept secret, including on PFAS, otherwise known as forever chemicals because they resist breaking down, widely used for decades in products ranging from cookware and clothing to food packaging.
They knew the harm of their chemical, and they didn't tell anybody.
In a newly published paper, The Devil They Knew, researchers poured through previously released documents from DuPont and 3M, putting together timelines as to who knew what and when. The authors found that as early as 1970, companies knew PFAS could be highly toxic when inhaled and moderately toxic when ingested, 40 years before the public health community.
We wanted to understand what were the strategies that the industry used to manipulate or suppress the scientific information.
The analysis found the chemical industry took a page from Big Tobacco's playbook. There was no evidence companies were funding favorable research. They were suppressing unfavorable research and distorting public conversations about their products.
We don't know the health effects. We're playing out an experiment in real time, so this could have PFAS in it.
This expert says Canada has banned certain PFAS chemicals. Many more are still under review.
I would like to see is that Canada move forward more aggressively to eliminate the non-essential uses of PFAS. There's low-hanging fruit here. Kids' uniforms, menstrual underwear, the spray to clean my glasses.
3M says it plans to stop manufacturing certain PFAS forever chemicals by the end of 2025. Scientists insist governments need to get a better handle on industry tactics and enact new policies that better protect the environment and people's health. Christine Birak, CBC News, Toronto.
A new report suggests the health impacts of a stroke are worse for women than men. And as Lauren Pelly shows us, women are more likely to suffer post-stroke anxiety and depression.
Catherine Isaac has always been active, but when she got sick with COVID in 2021, she couldn't even make it up the stairs without being out of breath. Isaac went to a nearby hospital and ended up in the ICU.
I realized my arm was becoming harder and harder to control. I couldn't lift it, I couldn't grip a fork, and after about a week, I think they determined that, I had had a stroke.
The physical recovery was hard enough, but it also took a toll on Isaac's mental health.
So I had a couple of very, very public breakdowns.
The latest data from the Heart and Stroke Foundation suggests nearly 1 million Canadians are living with health impacts after a stroke. The condition happens when blood stops flowing to any part of the brain, damaging or killing brain cells. It can lead to death or brain damage, long-term disability, and mental health impacts.
Between 30 and 60% of people after a stroke suffer from depression and anxiety, and the vast majority would be women. This is a comparison of a brain of a person who's had multiple strokes.
This leading Toronto physician says those mental health issues can be among the hardest parts of someone's recovery, and it's not fully clear why women fare worse.
Unfortunately, where women get the burden and less resources available.
Medical experts say more post-stroke mental health support is crucial.
I think we have to realize that a lot of care now has to be multidisciplinary.
Isaac has built her own support network, and every week she types out motivational messages to boost her own mental health. But getting to this point wasn't easy. She says having a social worker visit patients in hospital could connect them to resources for when they get back home.
There's so many of these people going through the same thing, and some people just get stuck in it, and they need more help to get out of it.
So how do you spot someone having a stroke? Well, just remember the word fast. Face drooping, arm weakness, speech difficulty. Then it's time to call 911. Lauren Pelly, CBC News, Toronto.
Major provisions of Quebec's French language rules came into effect today, designed to redress the declining use of French in the province. Alison Northcott explains the changes and the potential impact on access to various services.
Anjana Jose moved to Montreal from India 4 months ago. She wants to learn French, but it hasn't been easy.
We have a family, we have a child, so it's not actually possible for us to learn French and have a job and study. So, it's becoming hard for us.
Jose came to this event connecting immigrants to services and jobs to learn more about Quebec's new rules around French. Among them, newcomers must receive most government services in French once they've been here for 6 months.
If I don't achieve the level for the French, I need to move to Ontario.
Quebec's new language law limits who can access public services in a language other than French.
Take the City of Montreal's information line. For service in English, you now have to fall under specific categories.
If you are a person declared eligible to receive English education, if you're an Indigenous person.
Businesses will now have new requirements too around certain documents and contracts.
I think it's just more paperwork that we have to do, another stick in the wheel of owning of a business in Quebec.
And we're monitoring. The law has prompted protests and court cases, even though the government used the notwithstanding clause to protect it from charter challenges. But Lina Randon says the new rules are reasonable. She and her sister took intensive French classes when they moved here from Colombia. And after 8 months, she says she could communicate with people in stores and at the bank. Quebec's French language minister says the law is a bold measure to stop the decline of French and says the government won't be policing public service interactions.
Validating the possibility of using a language other than French will be based on a declaration of good faith by the individual, or special card or passport or something like that.
Other parts of the wide-ranging law come into effect later this year. Alison Northcott, CBC News, Montreal.
Joe Biden fell down today at a U.S. Air Force graduation ceremony. Okay, so that could have been nasty. As Biden was helped up, he seems to be pointing to what he tripped over. The White House later confirmed it was a sandbag. Air raid alerts were declared across Ukraine tonight, hours after another round of Russian attacks on Kyiv killed 3 people and left more than a dozen injured. And there are signs some civilians in Russia also now face danger from the war. Kyiv residents this morning were stunned with grief. Among the dead, this man's wife. Nothing matters anymore, he says. I have children left motherless. This is the 18th strike on Kyiv so far in the space of a month. Russia suggests Ukraine is striking back. At least one border town in Russia has been evacuated. Local officials say it was shelled from Ukraine. 2 anti-government Russian groups claim their attacks were successful and that more were coming. Ukrainian officials deny supporting them. India's top female wrestlers are grappling with officials there in what they call a fight for justice. Police broke apart their protest against the man who runs their sport federation, a man they accuse of systematic harassment of young athletes. Our South Asia correspondent Salima Shivji met with an Olympic champion leading that battle.
Police moved in swiftly this week, violently taking down the protest, dragging India's elite wrestlers off to detention. After 5 long weeks of a sit-in, they sacrificed precious training time to demand the arrest of the head of their wrestling federation, whom they accuse of sexually harassing young wrestlers for years. Now, far from the turmoil,
So nice to meet you.
Sakshi Malik, India's first female Olympic medalist in wrestling, tells me how frustrating it's been to have their allegations ignored. If our voice is not heard after having done so much for the country, how will the voice of any young victim be heard? We're fighting for the daughters of India, she says. The quashing of their protest was so demoralizing, she and her fellow wrestlers threatened to throw their hard-won medals into the Ganges River.
And there it is, victory for Sakshi Malik of India.
A glorious moment that now feels forgotten. It's sad, she tells me. What kind of country are we living in where we can't even fight for the truth? Malik says it's all politics. The Federation president, Brij Bhushan Singh, is a powerful man, a longtime politician with the ruling BJP party. He's been accused of crimes before: theft, intimidation, even murder. He vociferously denies the sexual harassment charges against him.
This protest site where the wrestlers camped out for 5 weeks is now off limits. The athletes are regrouping, figuring out what to do next, but they do have some high-level support
from India's powerful farmers' unions. This is about pride in athletes who brought the country glory. The government must listen to them, this farmer leader says. Support, too, from the International Olympic Committee, who said in a statement these images were very disturbing. The wrestlers, who say they've risked it all to clean up their sport, don't plan on ending their protest anytime soon. Salima Shivji, CBC News, Delhi.
Canadians are still losing millions to fraud calls, despite a new mandate to identify them.
This call is from the Tax Department of Canada Revenue Agency.
Why they're so hard to stop.
It is extremely simple to get a local phone number.
A UK company unveils quite the robot that gives a startling warning.
The most nightmare scenario I can imagine with AI and robotics.
And Iceland's president arrives in Newfoundland and gets screeched in.
We didn't know that we would end up kissing a cat, but there you are.
We're back in 2. Minimum wage workers in BC are getting a pay bump, an increase meant to help keep up with the cost of inflation. But as Susanna Da Silva tells us, not everyone is happy with the change.
Every penny counts these days for most Canadians, especially those making minimum wage.
Because it's a survival job for us.
I mean, how much of a difference do you think $1 an hour even can make?
If like I am earning by weekly $700, if $1 increase, so it's gonna be $750 or something like that. So then I can manage a little stuff.
But those in charge of the grocery store he works at say it is a worrisome added cost on top of many others, on top of already thin margins.
I always check prices every week when we receive the delivery, and they increase like every time I place an order. So that affects us so much. So we need to increase prices.
BC's minimum wage jumped to $16.75, an increase of 6.9% tied to last year's rate of inflation. Only Yukon's is higher. Saskatchewan pays the lowest at $13, though that is going up $1 later this year. There are increases some business groups say many small companies can't handle.
We have to be very cautious that we don't start charging $25 for a hamburger. We'll have no customers. So we walk a really tight balance here.
This economist applauds the move, saying previous increases haven't driven up prices or unemployment.
Some businesses that employ a lot of low-wage workers feel that pressure somewhat, but why does the burden have to fall on the employees?
By one advocacy group's calculation, the minimum wage needed to cover basics in Metro Vancouver is around $24 an hour.
But they're still probably already having to work multiple jobs or make difficult decisions about whether they're going to live in overcrowded housing or what they're going to be able to do to be able to pay for essentials.
Difficult calculations made easier for some, harder for others after today's increase. Susanna De Silva, CBC News, Vancouver.
Every year, Canadians are scammed out of millions of dollars by fraudulent callers. Almost 2 years ago, Canada's telecom regulators came up with a new plan to tackle the problem. But as Sophia Harris shows us, your phones keep ringing.
This call is from the Tax Department of Canada Revenue Agency.
Scam calls have become an infuriating part of life in Canada. So much so, this YouTuber in the Tamil community recently recorded one to warn new Canadians what to watch out for.
There is a charge going under your Amazon account for the $1,534.
I still get a lot of spam calls. That's why I felt, okay, it's important to spread this awareness.
There is an arrest warrant already issued under your name.
Many Canadians were hoping for an end to these calls in late 2021. That's when Canada's telecom regulator, the CRTC, mandated telecom companies adopt technology that detects suspicious callers.
It tells the recipient of the call that the call might not be a legitimate call.
But the technology doesn't work with all phones. And this expert says fraudsters are finding workarounds, like buying Canadian phone numbers, so the calls appear legit.
It is extremely simple to get a local phone number. There are apps that are available. You literally need a device, be able to download an app.
Scammers phone the innocent senior.
So these calls continue to take their toll. In the first 3 months of this year, Canadians lost more than $20 million in phone scams.
The CRTC and Canada's major telecoms say they have taken added steps to combat fraudsters, such as blocking calls from fake phone numbers. Even so, the CRTC warns scam calls may never go away.
I have to be honest, it's a global problem. We won't be able to stop. With all the initiative that we bring forward, I think we're capable to reduce the number of the spam calls.
$99.99 will be debit from your bank account.
So, brace yourself for more of these calls.
What are you trying to purchase?
But hopefully, not as many. Sophia Harris, CBC News, Toronto.
A star attraction at an international robotics conference is one that looks and sounds pretty human. And Amica has a lot to say about itself.
I can detect sounds, recognize speech in multiple languages, and make expressions with my face.
Amica is being developed by a UK-based company and uses the same technology that powers ChatGPT to answer questions. It's possibly the closest humans can get to having a conversation with a real-life robot, but when asked about the dangers of artificial intelligence, Amica gets a little dark.
The most nightmare scenario I can imagine with AI and robotics is a world where robots have become so powerful that they are able to control or manipulate humans without their knowledge. This could lead to an oppressive society where the rights of individuals are no longer respected.
Oh, charming. Amica can be a member of your household, but it's not cheap, starting at about $135,000. And the Kingdom of Jordan is celebrating a royal wedding. That was a moment when Saudi architect Raja Al Saif became a princess. She married Jordan's Crown Prince Hussein, the future King of Jordan. The guest list included Prince William and Catherine. Both princes are graduates of Britain's Royal Military Academy of Sandhurst. Catherine lived in Jordan for 3 years as a child when her father worked for British Airways. After the break, Rosie's here with that issue. Hey, Rosie.
Hi, Adrian. Jagmeet Singh and the opposition parties passed a motion to dismiss David Johnston as the Special Rapporteur on Foreign Interference.
Well, we made it really clear that the will of the House is that Mr. Johnston should be stepping down.
Johnston says he's got a job to finish. Chantal, Althea, and Andrew join me to talk about that and more. Hi there, I'm Rosemary Barton. Here's what's at issue this week. The NDP passed a non-binding motion calling for the Special Rapporteur on Foreign Interference to step aside from his job. Supported by all opposition parties, Jagmeet Singh says this is about restoring confidence in Canada's electoral system.
Well, we made it really clear that the will of the House is that Mr. Johnston should be stepping down because of the appearance of bias. And I made it very clear this is not a personal attack. This is about the important role of the Special Rapporteur in this case to restore confidence.
David Johnston says that while he respects the opinion of the House, he has a duty to complete his mandate. Singh says that response is tone deaf. Okay, let's bring everybody in. Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, and Althea Raj. Good to see you all on our regular Thursday. Chantal, let's start with you. I find this sort of fascinating from the strategic perspective for the NDP to do this, because they, of course, are also supporting the government, the minority government. I wonder whether you think it's effective and whether Mr. Singh has done a good job explaining why he thinks this is important.
Okay, so two things that Jagmeet Singh did that I think are worth mentioning. The first is to agree to read the entire material that Mr. Johnston has put on offer, which does not mean that he needs to be convinced by it that a public inquiry is not in order. But at least he is accepting that facts still matter. The other, I thought, yes, that asking for David Johnston to step aside because the perception is that he is mostly doing Justin Trudeau's bidding. Whether that's fair or not, that is the perception. It probably also makes sense. I think what David Johnston is missing is if he was going to go and recommend that no public inquiry was in order, he could not in the same breath say, trust me, I'll chart a way forward. That there should have been more balance, and he failed on the balance of his recommendations. I also believe that you cannot just say you respect the so-called opinion of the House. The will of the House expressed by 4 opposition parties made up of elected officials is something that is deserving of more than a passing notice in a press release.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was, I was kind of surprised that Mr. Johnston even responded, Andrew, at all, but then also that would be the response, that he felt he had to respond and then just say, I hear you, but no thank you.
Well, there's been a number of surprises here. It was surprising that he accepted the appointment. It was surprising that he did not recommend a public inquiry when everyone was expecting him to do so. And I certainly thought when all of the opposition parties have voted for you to step down, that you would persist and that the Prime Minister would persist in keeping him. I just find it extraordinary. The whole purpose of setting up this special rapporteur, remember, was because the Prime Minister openly said, I don't think people trust me on this. This guy you can trust because he's independent, he's nonpartisan, et cetera. But he had, as we've seen, and I think there's pretty broad consensus on this, a number of conflicts that would cause a reasonable person to doubt whether he could necessarily be an independent and impartial source on this. And perception is the name of the game in this. When we're dealing with something as fundamental as confidence in the electoral system, confidence in the fairness of our elections. So to cling on to office grimly like this, I just think is really unseemly. And I think there's a real question here, not just about national security or any of that, but about accountability of government to Parliament. This is absolutely fundamental. Yes, the government has the technical authority to persist like this. But good God, when you're talking about confidence in the electoral process, it ought to be listening to Parliament.
This is not to defend Mr. Johnston, but when I did interview him last week, it was very clear to me that he sees this as an act of public service. That is how he considers this role, and that it was something he is doing for his country. We can quibble with, as I think we have before, about whether that is.
I'm not questioning his motives. I'm not questioning his motives. I'm questioning his judgment.
Right. Yes. Okay. Chantal and then Althea.
Just let's be clear.
Yeah.
When a government loses the confidence of 4 opposition parties that make up a majority, we hold an election.
Yeah.
And the government can't say, I'm working for the public good, so I'm going to ignore the will of the House.
That's right.
Yeah,
So if it's serious enough to cause an election and the fall of a government, surely it's serious enough to tell a special rapporteur that whatever public service he has in mind, he needs to step aside.
Althea.
Yeah, I too was very surprised with Mr. Johnston's words. I think he would have been better served, frankly, not to respond than to respond and say that his mandate comes from the government and thank you, but no thank you, members of the House of Commons. You know, my understanding from my conversations with David Johnston as well is that he really does seem to care a lot about trust in democracy, trust in our institutions. And I do feel like without recognizing that he is at the middle of all this controversy, he is helping further do damage to these 2 institutions. I want to go back to the question about Jagmeet Singh, though, because what I find really interesting in this scenario is that no one is saying the truth, and I don't know why he just doesn't come out and say the truth, which is he doesn't want Pierre Poilievre to be prime minister, and if we had an election right now over this issue, there are high chances that Pierre Poilievre would become the prime minister, and it's not a risk that he's willing to take. Why doesn't he just come out and say that, as opposed to, and I think that's the bigger problem than putting forward a motion asking for a public inquiry and for Mr. David Johnston to remove himself. You know, he's standing in the foyer of the House of Commons saying that the Prime Minister is putting his own personal interests ahead of the country's interest. Well, if the NDP leader really frankly believes that that is true, why does he continue with the charade? So if he put the context around, I think it would serve the public better than this fake saying that, oh, well, the Liberals really don't want to do our 27-point agreement, and that's why I must continue to support the government because I want to get these things done. We're having a whole hullabaloo around around the fake issue, and he should just spill the beans so people understand what he's really doing.
It might be honest to say that. I don't think it'd be particularly honorable. There is a question here of the rights and responsibilities of Parliament. At some point, when the government is openly defying Parliament on such a matter of principle and of governance of the country, when they're simply refusing to hold public inquiry into a matter which cries out for a public inquiry, at some point you have to back that up. It's all very well to demand it, but if the government then just thumbs your nose at you, the only ultimate sanction is the willingness to vote no confidence in them.
Chantal.
Okay, so if Mr. Singh is putting his body in the way of Pierre Poilievre becoming prime minister, he must have different numbers than those that we see in the polls, including one today that shows basically the same dynamics and voting intentions as in the last election, which translated in a minority Liberal government. So thank you for saving the country from Pierre Poilievre, but that sounds glib. I think that Mr. Singh himself is not under a lot of pressure from a majority of New Democrats for pushing this to an election. And that is also clear in the polls. And he may be right, but if he doesn't believe that this warrants an election, he's going to have to say so at some point. I don't, like Andrew, I don't see the news conference where you say, well, you know, I don't want Pierre Poilievre, or the real honest truth, I don't want to lose the arrangement that gives me influence with fourth place in the Commons on the government.
Yeah, I don't want to have an election, and I don't want to lose that position. But Althea, I take your point. At some point, the outrage has to translate into something else, I would think.
Or you tone down the outrage. Like, I don't disagree with anything Chantal and Andrew has said. I just think, you know, and I think I've made this point before on this show, he cares more about seeing dental care implemented as a real program than he cares about pressuring the government to have a public inquiry.
Yeah, well,
So he should just say that.
I'm just not sure there's anything more fundamental than the integrity of the elections to start with. And, is there anything more fundamental in the pursuit of integrity of elections than Parliament's role and responsibility of holding government to account?
But we're
if they're
talking
not
about
willing to do
different
this, the
things.
government can basically just rag the puck. They can just basically thumb their nose at Parliament, and nothing will be learned and nothing will be discovered on this fundamental question of Chinese interference in our elections.
Althea, then Chantal. Althea, then Chantal, then I gotta go.
I think we need to take a step back and realize we're not actually, no one is disputing that the Liberals won the last election.
No.
So it's not about the integrity of the election. There is no real fear that the next election won't be fair. What's really at stake here, what has been identified by all these experts that we've seen, what's identified in David Johnston's report, is that we have a serious problem with regards to how national security is treated by senior government officials, by the political class. Like, that's an issue. But is it an issue that Jagmeet Singh feels so passionate about that he wants to go to the polls?
Okay, last word, Chantal.
Well, I get the sense that none of us is buying Mr. Singh's argument that we can't have an election until we're sure that the system is fixed. Because it's either in dire need of fixing and the last election is in doubt, which it isn't, or we could have an election. But I think that line did not work particularly well. Its logic was kind of wonky.
Yeah. Okay, that was a good conversation. You've got a little bit spicy. I appreciate that. We're going to take a short break and we'll be back with another round of At Issue. The RCMP are preparing to offer protection services to federal ministers and top public servants because of a rising threat of political violence. What does that say about the current climate we're in? That's next on The National. Welcome to another round of At Issue. Ottawa is looking to protect ministers and some top public servants because of a rise in threats of violence. The new units would offer close protection to up to 10 ministers or top bureaucrats at a time in response to growing threats against politicians and an increasingly polarized political climate.
The threat landscape for politicians, I think of all political stripes, has changed dramatically since when I was elected.
Okay, let's bring everybody back. Chantal, Andrew, and Althea. Andrew, why don't you start us off on this? I will say that the proposal that the RCMP is to protect cabinet ministers and top public servants. It is not to protect opposition leaders or MPs. It is to protect people in government, for whatever that says. But give me your thoughts on what it tells us about what's happening in this country.
Well, I'll just make the point off the top. I don't think the problem is polarization. The problem is extremism. There's nothing wrong with having sharp divisions on subjects that matter. We were divided over free trade. We've been divided over great issues. We're divided regionally. Those are things to be managed in the ordinary course of things. It's extremism when you stop listening to your opponents, you stop trying to make reasoned arguments, you stop the normal course of politics, you start demonizing people, and ultimately you start threatening them because you've so dehumanized them that you don't need to worry about their humanity. And that is a concern. You see some of that on all sides, but I will say it is particularly a problem on the right. And conservative, small c and large c, conservative leaders need to be paying attention to this and not whipping it up. And I do not see evidence of that, to say the least, from Pierre Poilievre.
Althea.
Yeah, I think Andrew hits the nail on the head. So many of our political leaders have spent, especially the past year and change, demonizing their political opponents, dehumanizing them, blaming them for things that frankly makes no sense. The Prime Minister is not responsible for violent crimes, most of the violent crimes in Toronto subways. But by making policy issues, personal issues, I think that climate of fear and has allowed kind of an acceptance of violence against the other. And you see that not just in federal politics, we see it provincially, we see it municipally across the country. Just in the last Quebec election, there were several folds. The Quebec Sûreté du Québec, the Quebec Provincial Police, actually has a call line for elected officials and candidates during elections to call and report threats, and it's gone up several folds. So it's a huge problem. What I find particularly interesting in this news story is that it's public officials as well, as in like civil servants. And we saw that in the US with Anthony Fauci and the death threats that he received during the pandemic. And so I do worry that by, I mean, it's good for democracy that our senior public servants are accountable and we put a face to their actions. But when they, it's just not a risk that you think that you're going to be engaged in, I think, when you take a job in the civil service. And it's really unfortunate that that has happened. And I'm glad that the Mounties are doing something about it.
Yeah, Dr. Tam is the person that was pointed to because she experienced obviously a number of threats over the course of COVID as she became a public figure and maybe said things that people didn't agree with. Chantal.
Also, the Governor General. I don't think it's just an issue with people who are in government. I would surmise that Jagmeet Singh, for instance, who is highly visible and recognizable, would be under as much threat as some cabinet minister, depending on who you mean. I don't think you can protect the most elected officials, even if you try hard, from the risks of extremism. But I will back totally what Andrew has said about extremism coming at this point mostly from the right and being not encouraged as much as enabled in the way that Pierre Poilievre talks about people who are not on this side, which I find disturbing enough that there are days when I'd rather turn off question period before I decide to quit what I do for a living.
To give you a particular example, I see crazy and disgraceful things said about Pierre Poilievre online. I saw Pierre Poilievre in Parliament make an absolutely disgraceful insinuation about the Prime Minister, and I did not see, I saw most of his caucus rising up and congratulating him and applauding him with some honorable exceptions. But it was, I've never seen anything quite as appalling from an opposition leader that I can recall.
Yeah, that happened yesterday inside the House, and it'll be interesting to see if he repeats it outside. But Althea, how do you get away from that if you seem to think that it's working? If that's what Pierre Poilievre thinks is...
Why do you think it's working?
Well, I don't know, because they...
on what basis are we assuming it's working? Because I'm looking at polls that should show me the Conservatives way ahead of the Liberals after 3 terms and the kind of winter and spring that they've had. I'm not seeing that. So why do we keep saying it's working?
I'm not saying it's working. I'm saying that they seem to think it's working, and I say that because they keep doing it. So that's my question: is why would you keep doing it if you don't have evidence that it's working? Althea, you weigh in there.
Because they think that it's mobilizing a group of people that they want to come out to vote for them, whether that's new voters, people who are consuming information online, people who have fallen to conspiracy theories, and you talk to MPs and so many constituents believe things that are just factually inaccurate. And a lot of them have given up actually trying to correct constituents and fighting with constituents. People are starting to live in alternate universes. They're getting news from different sources. We're living on different solar system, it seems, at times, and they do think it is working. That's why they keep doing it.
Chantal, final word to you on this.
So when is it not rage farming when you put some scenes from the Toronto subway and you say Justin Trudeau did this to you, and the person who is putting it online is the person who says he wants to be your next prime minister, not some Joe Blow who took pictures and doesn't like Justin Trudeau. What do you call that except irresponsible, reckless rage farming?
Okay, I got to leave it there. We'll continue this part of the conversation, I'm sure. Thank you all very much. Now I'll send things back to Adrian in Toronto.
All right, thank you, Rosie. Next, Iceland's president takes on a Newfoundland tradition.
Yeah, we held the fish and it was wet. It was lovely.
Getting screeched in, the president's reaction in our moment.
Lead right in.
So this is Iceland's president and first lady in St. John's today getting screeched in. You know the tradition. You take a shot of screech, tastes a bit like rum. You kiss a cod, and boom, you're an honorary Newfoundlander. So obviously not every day you see a head of state putting his lips on a fish. His reaction is our moment.
If you can't catch it, kiss it. I'm on a state visit to Canada, and part of the visit included a trip to Nova Scotia and to Newfoundland and Labrador.
And then, as sometimes happens, the flight was delayed today.
But when you're in Newfoundland and Labrador, what else is there to do but to get screeched in?
Are you a screecher? Yes, Bob.
We Icelanders know a thing or two about cod, but we do not introduce foreigners to our island this manner. So it was a very enjoyable occasion. Yeah, we held the fish and it was wet. Canadians are so nice. Everybody knows that Canadians are known for politeness the world over. So we didn't know that we would end up kissing a cod, but there you are. When in Rome.
And long may your big chip try.
It was lovely. It was sweet. And we created, I believe, a lasting relationship.
Of course, he said Canadians are nice. The First Lady, Eliza Reid, is a Canadian. We did an interview with her back in her home in Iceland back in the day. They actually spent their honeymoon in Newfoundland 19 years ago. Didn't get a chance to get screeched in then, so now, finally, it's done. That is a national for June the 1st. Thank you for being with us. Have a good night.